and welcome. It's very exciting to see so many friendly faces because we're going to have a very respectful forum today, and I'm looking forward to that. Now, unfortunately, our first speaker is missing in action. Gillian West was going to do the Welcome to Country because she's a Bunurong Palawa woman. I'm not, so I'm going to do an acknowledgement of country in her absence. So I would like to pay respects to the leaders past, present and emerging of the Bunurong Nation where we're meeting today. I would like to acknowledge that I still respect and support the invitation from the Uluru Statement from the Heart, and I would also like to say that always was, always will be Aboriginal land. So welcome along everybody. We're a little bit of housekeeping, toilets that way and that way. We're going to have a QR code, well we have a QR code at the front desk, so I encourage you before you leave today to connect to that QR code and find out all about what's going on in the greater movement of independence for Flinders. So our speakers, ta-da! We have an amazing array of speakers today. They'll each take a turn. They only have 10 minutes, but you have an opportunity to ask them a question. If you would like a question, if you would like to ask a question, put up your hand and Sarah will run really fast towards you with a piece of paper and a pen. You can write your question down. It could be a general question for the whole panel or for a specific speaker. And then we will collate those questions and we'll ask the questions at the end. So, because I find often what happens is we all want to ask the same question, so rather than ask 5 different versions of the same one. Okay, so I think that brings us to our first speaker, who probably for most people in Victoria, if not the world, know, and that's the lovely Rosie Batty. I know that she's had a very personal effect in my life and my extended family, calling on her strength to get us through difficult times. And I know that Rosie has had her own battles with that. So I would just like to introduce her now. So 10 years ago, Rosie's son Luke was murdered by his father at Tyap cricket grounds. Now, unless you're living in a cave, you would know about that. From that moment on, Rosie has tirelessly campaigned to raise awareness of family violence and shift community attitudes, and I feel that she definitely has. She was made Australian of the Year in 2015 and has inspired many to find the strength and courage to move forward. She also has a new book out, which she didn't want to promote today, so I'm going to. Well worth a read. So, Rosie Batty.
What do they say? Available at all good bookshops. Thank you everybody, and thank you for that really warm welcome. It's really nice to be invited to be able to speak. Many of you will know I don't think I've shut up talking since that very sad time when I didn't lose my son. He was actually murdered, and he was murdered by his father, which was horrific. It still is, and it's still something I will always have to live with. But you also experience the best of humanity when you experience a terrible tragedy. And it's really nice to see some of my friends here today who've been on that support journey with me. We need community. We need family. We need to know we're not alone. We need to feel supported and that we matter. And many people live alone and lonely. And if it wasn't for COVID, really driving home just how many people do live a very lonely, disconnected life. So for me, I guess, since my son was murdered, I've channeled my grief. I've channeled my grief with the intention to make change, to make a difference. I didn't know how long that would last. I didn't know the reach I would have. But a tragedy that is so horrendous stops people in their track. How could that be? How could that happen? At a cricket practice in a community, small community like Tyre, how could that indeed happen? I am a white, middle-class woman. and I've always appreciated and never taken for granted. That is why I have been heard. That is why I have been believed. And that is why I've had a voice. And so I also acknowledge that very many women who experience violence and discrimination on a level that we, predominantly white people, will never know. And that is my Aboriginal colleagues and women from CALD, culturally and linguistically diverse communities, and women with disability. When I first started talking about this issue, it was very uncomfortable to name this as a gendered issue. It was very uncomfortable to everyone, for everybody to recognise and understand this is predominantly violence committed by men. And when we look at community attitudes, they have changed. And when I look and see the news, and I see another woman has been murdered, we are naming it, we are outraged, and we still say, how could this be? This is absolutely not acceptable, and it's not what we want in our communities. And indeed, the federal government does play a key role. Without their leadership, we really don't make a great headway. But it's not just down to government. It's about every one of us individually, understanding that we all play a part in stopping it, in preventing it, and being part of the societal change we need to see. The stats are still as horrific as they were when I started this journey 10 years ago. 1 woman a week is being murdered. Next week there will be another woman that will be murdered, and you will see it on the news. But 10 years ago it didn't make the news, it didn't make the headlines. 1 in 3 women will experience physical violence over the age of 15, and 1 in 4 children will be permanently impacted, and their potential for life will be affected. I have been saying those stats for 10 years. It is tiring. It is confronting. And it really surprises me that many people still don't understand exactly what a horrific and all-consuming and wide-spreading issue this is, that affects every suburb in every pocket of Australia, in the most privileged. And we live in a lovely area. We live in one of the most beautiful parts of Victoria and Australia. And we're really, really fortunate. The day that Luke was murdered, I spoke to the media. I don't know what I was thinking, but I did. And I said, family violence can happen to anyone, no matter how nice your house is or how intelligent you are. It can happen to anyone and everyone. I don't know how I thought to say that, but that message is really, really important. Because it happens to people like us, people we know, our family members, our children, our siblings, people that we care about, can be affected in varying ways. So in 10 years, I'd like to think it's become a mainstream conversation. It's not just a shameful secret kept behind closed doors. That we are challenging each other about it, and we're interested and passionately trying to understand, how do we stop it? Well, we're here to understand, I think, how we can play a part in politics. I think that's what has brought us here today. And what I can say to you is, whoever we are voting for has to have this as a political issue that they are willing to back. In 10 years, I have continued unrelentingly, alongside many organisations and many other people, fighting for scraps of funding that is never enough. We have increased the awareness of family violence. People are reaching out in greater numbers, with greater confidence in police response, specialised organisations. and family and community support. But this huge number of people, with women and children particularly affected, has put an enormous strain on all of those every single day, working to protect them. So we have refugees on the peninsula that can't take the volume of families needing to be safe. And in Victoria, or in Melbourne should I say, we have 300 families a night having to be put up in a motel, which is not safe, which is not appropriate, because we just haven't got the facilities to cope. That is the scale of the issue, and we must do more. Thank you.
Every time I've heard Rosie speak, I feel a little punch in my heart, because it's such an important issue. So the reason that we've chosen these subjects today is that there's been extensive lobbying, campaigning around the peninsula about issues that are most important to people who live on the peninsula, and domestic violence was definitely up there, and that's why we've chosen these particular speakers today. So thank you so much, Rosie.
I was within time.
You got 2 minutes. I mean,
2 minutes, sure.
1 minute and 7 seconds.
Doesn't mean you get that time, Sarah. Okay. The next person I'd like to introduce is demonstrating why he received his most recent award of Father of the Year. Ta-da! Mr. Ben Smith. Now, let me give you a little bio about him. Lives in Cape Shank, so he's a local. He's a father of a 5-year-old. Ben is currently serving as the CEO of the Mornington Community Support Centre, where he leads 8, can't read my writing, specialist staff and over 220 volunteers. And I'm sure there's probably volunteers in this room now, doing their best to support our community. As a volunteer, he serves as a non-executive director of 2 not-for-profits, the Community Information Support Victoria and Fusion Supported Housing. He's worked in the community services sector for nearly 2 decades, so he started when he was 8, and recently was awarded the 2024 Victorian Father of the Year.
Thank you, Robin, and it's so good to be here with you all. Mum's working today, so Daddy's also working today, and it's good to have another young face in the room shared with you all as well. So I'm just going to be talking a little bit about cost of living today, and that encompasses everything that we kind of have in life and what costs us money and to live. So it's pretty straightforward as a definition. But really I wanted to kind of tackle it in 3 different sections of our community. Because at the Community Support Centre we sort of deal with it in various different ways. But I think the cross-section of people that we've got in the room here today, I think it's important to understand it from the various aspects of community life. So I'm going to deal with the top first, the top income earners, the people who are generally classified as high net worth or high income earners. For those people, cost of living, the increased level of cost of living offers them, not much in the way of roadblocks. However, there are some considerations for individuals in this category. Namely, they are things like some might be asset rich and income poor. And we're seeing a lot of that around this community with a high degree of retirees or an older population on the peninsula. That offers some pretty significant challenges for people who don't necessarily want to move home because it's where their family might be, it's where their community connections might be, health services, friends, family connections. When you uproot somebody from their home, and generally speaking, when that's a forced move, so whether it be because it's been an eviction or maybe the house is burned down or something like that, or if you cannot sustain to live there anymore, it's you're moving not by your choice. It's one of the highest things that affects our well-being in a negative fashion. Forced moves impact people's well-being really significantly. So that's kind of number 1 in that high income bracket. The second thing I just mentioned up there is that oftentimes people in a high income category are business owners, And I think, as you'll see in any newspaper today, businesses are being hit pretty hard, particularly those who are associated with non-discretionary spending. So oftentimes families who might be well off right now, in the years to come, might well see a significant battering of their status in the world, and therefore, chaos might occur in that home. So moving on a little bit sort of down the income trajectory, down to those middle income earners and those middle sort of societal brackets. This cohort is what we consider at the Community Support Centre at the moment as our highest kind of new client model. Like they're the people that are coming in for the very first time because the cost of living has meant that they now need support. So things like, groceries, food, health costs, all of the things that you might associate with living, we're seeing an enormous increase in people coming to seek support from support services, not from, we don't measure friends, family, church connections, anything like that. This is purely from a community support centre perspective. We're seeing an increase in people coming to seek support for the very first time. Let me tell you what that means for our model of delivery in terms of support. More than 65% of people coming to seek support in really kind of since the beginning of time from our organisation's perspective, which is 41 years now. We've seen the balance of new clients to existing clients, new clients representing maybe 25 to 30% of people. Now that's about 50%. So it's about 50-50 people walking through the door. And so what it means is that the people that have always struggled are continuing to struggle, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But we're seeing new cohorts of people who haven't sought support before. And the challenges in the family dynamics or the household dynamics of those people are one thing, but the service delivery from our perspective is a really challenging change. Because what it's meant is we now need to enter the education space, not the school space, but educating people when they walk through the door of what's available. How do you ask for help? How do you connect yourself with the other people around you in a way that you haven't done before? And how do you then rebuild yourself from the place that you're at now? Because that's a really difficult thing to do, to go and ask for help in our community, unfortunately. So what we're seeing with that new cohort is that experience of seeking support for the first time. And what that is doing in those households is, when someone goes to seek support from a place like ours, that's like months in the making in the household, in that person's story. They've been debating, okay, what should I leave out today? What should I not pay for this week? What should I give up? All the things that kind of, we've been taught to cut back and limit your expenses. That's all been done already. And so once they get to us, they've gone through an enormous period of social anxiety and really kind of, difficult stress and tension within the household. And that is causing all sorts of other effects in family dynamics, conflict, family violence. All of those things are generating significant harm in those households and therefore in the community. What it's also doing in those households is creating a sense of shame and loneliness. Two of the biggest things that impact social cohesion. When people come to seek support, there's a huge barrier that they've got to jump over in their own life. Not, hopefully not in the experience that they get when they walk through the door. But that's, again, something that we've got to battle with on the grassroots level. Coming just down a little bit now to the low income earners. So these are people who, that's kind of split almost into two categories. One is the low income earners, so those that are might be in the workforce or underemployed, that aren't necessarily earning what they need to earn to cover the costs of their living. And then you kind of almost go below that to the very low income earners, and those are likely to be age pensioners, people on disability support pension or job seeker payments, or again significantly underemployed for what they need in their life. To give you an example, the statistic or the benchmark for an affordable housing payment, so whether that's a rental or a mortgage, is no more than 30% of a person's income. if you're a single parent with one child and you're on all of the possible payments that you might be able to access, the affordable rental for you is $190 a week. Now, I'm not sure if you've checked realestate.com lately. Unavailable. So you've got to be sharing another home with another person or another family if you can find that other home with the other person and the other family. With a vacancy rate under 1% on the peninsula, it's impossible. So those people, again, coming back to one of my first comments, are moving out of area, competing with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of other people in those other areas that are battling with the same stresses in their life. So the low and very low income earners are dealing with shelter as a major issue in their life. Even public rentals, if you're sort of classed as not the ones that, even a public housing rental, there are some categories within public rentals that are fairly much fixed on market rate rentals, not necessarily fully subsidised. So we've had clients come through the door that have been in public housing for nearly their whole adult life, and their rent's just gone up $120 a week. Because that's just been regraded back up to the rental market. So there's some big conversations, but that's perhaps for another day. The other aspects of a person's life are that factor where it's literally you're trading really horrible scenarios. Do I pay my rent? Do I fill my pantry with the bare basics? Do I go to the doctor? Or do I get my children some new shoes for school because the other ones don't work anymore? And that's daily, absolutely daily. That battle is happening in the life of people living on the peninsula. We've seen both us in Mornington, the Southern Peninsula Community Support down in Rosebud, and Western Port Community Support over in Hastings have all seen year on year about a 45 to 50% increase in demand last year to the year before. Our month of July and August, compared to last July and August, we saw an 80% increase in distribution of food. Now that for us personally, in Mornington, that represents an extra $30,000 in food distribution alone. So it's unsustainable. So one last point before I run out of time. The cost of living crisis that we're all experiencing is not a new one for people on very low and low incomes. This has been decades in the making. Anybody here who's been a single parent or a single household earner will tell you that story. The things that it impacts in the life of our community, where poverty exists, and that's what I'm talking about here with the cost of living crisis, poverty. You've got a decrease in social cohesion, so where people get along with each other and belong together. You've got a decrease in harmony within community, and you've also got a decrease in political inclusion and political sort of sense of belonging and a sense of empowerment. So when people are down here in their life, they're not thinking about contacting their local MP. So I'll just leave that one with you. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Ben. Those statistics are a little bit way worse than I realised, so thanks for sharing that information. This is why it's so important that we vote for a person who will do something about it. Now, the next speaker that we have is Dr. Sue Barrell. Now, I could probably talk for an hour and a half and still not cover everything that Sue does, so I've made my own bio of her based on conversations. So she's probably going to say to me next week, you didn't mention this or that. Well, these are the things I think are the most important. So Sue is Dr. Sue Barrell, former Chief Scientist at Bureau of Meteorology. She continues her commitment, past retirement, to science through multiple science leadership roles, strategy, board and advisory roles across a wide spectrum of science and technology, from earth sciences to physics. Sue is actively involved in national and international efforts in relation to climate policy and coordination and integration of Earth observations, as well as chairing, this is a big one, the Great Barrier Reef Recovery and Adaptation Program's Intervention Risk Review Group. Sue chairs Australia's Marine National Facility Steering Committee and the Stawell Underground Physics Laboratory, which is amazing. So here is Dr. Sue Barrell.
Thank you, Robin. You could say I'm stupid rather than amazing, but thank you. The issues that we're talking about today are spanning everything from the personal to the planetary. I'm going to start with the planetary, but clearly the issues related to sustainability are also deeply personal, both in terms of the impacts and the actions that we need to implement. So, a bit of history. Humans, through our very existence, received an enormous, possibly unique in the universe gift, and that is the gift of life on a planet that had just the right mix of conditions at the right time to kick off the processes that allowed us to exist, to evolve and to thrive. What are we now doing to that planet? Why are we threatening the very gift of life that it gave us, and how do we stop it? So whether or not there is sentient life on any other equivalent to humans anywhere else in the universe is a moot point. At a guess, it's statistically likely there are, given the sheer size of the universe, that at least on one other planet there exists the same mix of chemical, thermal, physical conditions that sparked life on Earth. However, even if it does exist, the likelihood that it actually could serve as our planet B on the timescales that we're damaging our own planet is zero. So scientific consensus has it that the Earth is about 4.5 billion years old, and that the earliest human life forms may have come into existence somewhere between 1.6 and 5 million years ago. I'll leave the rest of the history of different species that make up the human genus to the anthropologists, but the key thing is that Homo sapiens, the species that you and I belong to, is the only human species alive and thriving today. Central to the gift given to Homo sapiens, and the feature that allowed us more than any other species before us to become a global species, is the enormous climatological and geophysical stability that we've enjoyed for some 11,700 years, since the end of the last planetary ice age, identified in geological terms as the Holocene. There have been some natural climate perturbations through that time, and through that period, but they've been of fairly limited effect and duration, such as the Little Ice Age. Likewise, the Earth has moved geologically, with earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanic eruptions, bringing occasional disruption and disaster. But all of these things have been on relatively local scales. While Homo sapiens came into being before the start of the Holocene, it is during this period of climate stability that we have seriously thrived and become the people and the global civilization we are today. We've learnt to harness and exploit the natural wealth of the planet through agriculture, transport, energy and medicine, and our civilizations have developed, spread, traded, fought, conquered, and in some cases fallen. Whether or not our brains really did get any bigger, again I'll leave that to the anthropologists, we have developed our senses of society, curiosity and communication. We've learnt the value and the power of science and knowledge. We've discovered and exploited technology, and we've pushed our ambitions well beyond our earthly horizons. Initially, we took from the land, from the sea, and from each other only what was required to meet our immediate needs. But as our communities, our reach, and our ambitions expanded, that changed. Like many gifts that were received long ago and inherited rather than earned directly, we've lost sight of the gift itself and what an important role it played in shaping the development and achievements of our long-forgotten ancestors. And somewhere along that development track, in fact probably only within the last few generations, we've crossed a line. That was the point at which we started to take from the Earth faster than the Earth could naturally replenish or rebalance through its natural processes. That imbalance now places the environment, the climate, and the ecosystems and natural resources we depend on, and hence humans themselves at risk. The imbalance and the extent of the adaptation and survival challenge that we face is simply illustrated by noting that the approximate global temperature change over the Holocene, over the last 10,000 or more years, as a result of natural processes, was about 4 degrees centigrade, while human-induced climate change is predicted is projected to inflict a similar degree of warming in less than a century. There's been mixed success so far in getting this clear message through to those that have the power to mobilise a united and coherent response, be it through government, industry or grassroots people power, ideally all of the above. Aligning global, national and local efforts is challenging, partly because of the complexity of the global society that we've evolved to, the many levels of decision making and vested interests, the power of the economy at all levels, and arguably greed. Commitments have been made, clean technologies do exist, but the response is slow, and the longer it takes for genuine action, the bigger the challenge becomes. So many people now lead their lives completely unaware of their ultimate dependence on the earth and of the threats posed by the overuse and abuse we've inflicted upon it. When the Paris Cathedral Notre Dame was devastated by fire in April 2019, people around the world rallied to aid its recovery, citing the 850-year-old cathedral as a global legacy. Notre Earth is surely an even more essential global legacy, one that requires an urgent and united global commitment to recover and sustain for the future, our future. In scientific terms, the Earth is a complex integrated system spanning atmosphere, ocean, ice, land and space. And all of these systems work together to support all manner of ecosystems. They're all important, but I want to focus now on the role of the ocean. The ocean is integral to our health and prosperity, both as people and in the broader context of our planet and all its interdependent ecosystems. From the human perspective, the ocean is an amazing, life-sustaining resource. It moderates the air we breathe, it drives our climate, it feeds us, it heals us, it supports critical biodiversity from coral reefs to the deep ocean. It connects us to each other. The ocean covers more than 70% of the Earth's surface and holds 97% of its water. It provides more of the oxygen we breathe than all of the tropical rainforests. It's always been there for us, and hence it's taken for granted, much like the gift that the Earth gave us. As Australians, we're passionate about the ocean. Our coastline stretches more than 50,000 kilometres, and more than 85% of Australians live within 50 kilometres of the coast, and that includes all of us. Yet for the most part, the coast is where our interest stops. We don't think about what's over the horizon or down deep very often. And if we do, it can be scary, cold, dark, deep and a long way away. The connection between human health and ocean health is immutable. There is no healthy planet without a healthy ocean. And it follows that we have an extraordinary self-interest in keeping it healthy. The impact of bad behaviour and ill-informed decisions is demonstrated in many ways by the nutrient pollution into coastal ecosystems, by the increased presence of hazardous substances in the Southern Ocean, by the intentional dumping of waste, especially plastics, which comprise up to 80% of marine litter, and which have been recorded in more than 1,400 marine species, and by depletion of keystone species such as krill, not to mention microplastics and nanoplastics. However, there are some good examples also about how we can make a better future for the ocean and for us, to deliver both a healthy ocean and economic opportunities. We know that when we get it right, we can, and better manage human behaviour, the ocean can recover and we can do good, not harm. The recovery of humpback whales and blue whales following the ban on commercial whaling is one example of positive impact. Bleached coral reefs may be able to recover from excess heat events if they've been well managed to avoid overexploitation, and their recovery and adaptation can be strengthened through targeted interventions, such as breeding more heat-resilient corals. The earlier we achieve net zero emissions, the easier recovery and the essential adaptation will be across the whole of the Earth system. The UN Decade for Ocean Science is a 10-year global framework to identify, generate and use critical ocean knowledge to manage the ocean sustainably. Ocean Decade Australia is a not-for-profit organisation with a mission to connect Australia's ocean stakeholders across business, government and the wider community, to encourage innovation and good practice, and to inform a new national oceans policy to reinstate the health and sustainability of the ocean in the face of climate change. The ocean is full of potential and ripe for those that bring an innovative and entrepreneurship approach to their commitment to a healthy ocean, as long as that healthy ocean is at the forefront. I'd like to finish with a poem, which comes courtesy of the Antarctic Science Foundation. When you delve deep enough beneath the surface of Antarctica, when you drill down and pull up a cylinder of centuries sealed in ice, when you reveal the history of humanity, slice by slice, millimetre by millimetre, millennium by millennium, when you see the future taking shape, improbably bright, impossibly delicate, when you scan the ocean floor and discover a soft white sea slug whose venom contains a blessing, a compound that could promise a cure for childhood leukemia. When you look around and realise that this is humanity's greatest library and we've read 1% of the books. When you venture to the coldest, driest, highest, windiest, wonderfulest place on Earth, you discover a deeper truth. This isn't us saving the planet. This is the planet saving us. The biggest threat to our planet is the belief that there is no problem, or that if there is a problem, someone else will fix it. There is no one else. Thank you.
Well, that was pretty impressive, wasn't it? That poem is so beautiful. The first time I heard that poem, I had a little tear because I feel like it is our library. So this is one of the reasons that I am involved in the Independent for Flinders movement, is because climate change and the issues that we're facing are an existential threat for me, for my children, for my potential grandchildren, for all of my friends, for everyone. And I feel that we've had too long on inaction. It's time to get really, really serious. And that's why I believe we need to elect an independent in Flinders. Okay, so our next speaker. Our next speaker is as local as you can get. It's Councillor Despi O'Connor. So Despi is a Briars Ward councillor. She's a former mayor and she was a candidate in the last federal election. She's been a feet on the ground community member in Mount Martha at the local school and kindergarten, the Life Saving Club and the Mount Martha Basketball Club. She's a huge supporter of our local biolinks and has brought together lots of local environmental groups to form an alliance. And this is sort of something I think that a lot of groups operate in isolation, so well done on that one. I love it. She chairs the Consultative Committee on Gambling and sits on the Metropolitan Transport Forum, the Liquor Accord and the AAA Housing Committees. She does a lot more as well. If there's anything going on, Despi's there. I follow her on social media and she is one busy woman. So thank you, Despi.
Questions? Put your hand up. Sarah.
Thank you. We had a few people outside the door, but I think they've come through now, so. Okay. It's great to see so many people here. So I'm talking about housing and homelessness today, and who would have thought that we would have a housing crisis on the Mornington Peninsula? I never even dreamed that that was a thing for this area. We, and I think all of us may not be aware, that we have the 4th highest rate of homelessness in the state. That completely blows my mind. How is that happening here, in the most beautiful place in Victoria, in perhaps one of the richest places in Victoria? And I wanted to just make a point before I keep going. I am not an expert in housing and homelessness. I am not. But what I am is a strong advocate. I want to lift people's voices. I want people who need housing to be heard. I want to demand better from our governments because our governments aren't doing enough to help in this area. In 2020, I was elected as a councillor and only weeks later elected as mayor by my peers. I was thrown head first into learning. Luckily, it's something that I love because I'm a forever learner. But through this journey, I learnt more about the place that I live in, about the community and the many different communities that we have across the peninsula. On heading into the first lockdown, I headed to the Mornington Community Support Centre. Now, this was the first lockdown in 2021. So we'd already had a year of COVID. And I thought, I can help. Surely I could do something. I'm sitting at home at the moment, doing nothing. That's what it felt like. I'm sure there were things I was doing, but I felt like I was doing nothing. What could I do to help? So I headed to the Mornington Community Support Centre. I met Stuart, who was in the position before Ben. And Stuart started to give me the cold hard facts of what had happened over the last year, in the first year of COVID lockdowns. And let's be honest, housing problems didn't happen as a result of COVID, but COVID certainly helped to increase them. I learnt a lot in that year, and I've spent much time since sitting with people like Ben and Jeremy from the Southern Peninsula Community Support Centre and Gemma from Fusion. And I have spent only a little bit of time though with Georgia from Western Port. It's hard to get Georgia to sit at any one time because she's just got a big job on her hands on the other side of the peninsula. So my role is to advocate for my community. To literally take the cover off the issues that are hidden from most of us. I have been on the AAA Housing Committee for the past year, listening to more experts about the housing crisis that we're in. Now, AAA means affordable, available, and I always forget the third one, accessible. Affordable, available, accessible housing. And I have to tell you, we are lacking in all three. Homelessness is not what we all thought it was, what we grew up thinking it was. The myths around how people become homeless seem obsolete to me now that I've met and have known those who have experienced it. Over the past 4 years, we have had some major events that have certainly impacted rates of homelessness. The bushfires in 2019, COVID, floods, and a cost of living crisis. It's the perfect storm, isn't it, really? In 2021, Councillor Sarah Race and I met with those working in the field, those with lived experience and other experts from around the world, and here in Australia, including Michael Fotheringham, who is now the CEO of AHURI, which is the Australian Housing and Urban Research Institute. Because of course, we had 9 other councillors we had to convince that this was a real thing and it was happening here. We did our research and we connected the dots, and a motion was put up to council to declare a housing crisis. We'd done the work to convince our fellow councillors, and we knew that without this piece of advocacy, going forward was going to be a longer road. So I'm going to give you a few facts now on homelessness and housing on the Mornington Peninsula. We know that homelessness on the peninsula has increased by 37% in 5 years. We know that there are over 3,000 current applications for social housing, just sitting, waiting. We know that on any given night, there are around 689 people experiencing homelessness on the peninsula. So that's a number that's been brought together over lots of days and through our support services and Housing Victoria's work as well. Many of these people are in their cars. They're in tents. They include women and children, putting them at risk while public housing sits empty due to a lack of maintenance. More than 60% of those seeking crisis support are women. There is no fit-for-purpose crisis accommodation on the peninsula. The ranch, on the corner of Nepean and Benton's, has around 13 rooms, and although being rented by the support centres, our community support centres, there is a future for this property, and it does not include crisis accommodation. More than 30% of the women seeking support have children with them. The groups most in need are women aged between 30 and 39 who also experience the highest levels of abuse. Almost a quarter of those experiencing homelessness are under 18. But 16% of them are employed. This is the craziest part, isn't it? They're employed. Sorry, I missed my spot. And 19% have a mental health condition. On the peninsula, it is not all roses and white picket fences. We have a higher proportion of people on lower incomes, 28.6%, compared to Greater Melbourne, where it's 22.6%. That blows my mind. 35% of households in private rentals are suffering housing stress, which is higher than Melbourne at 26.8%. The median rent for a home on the peninsula is now significantly higher than Greater Melbourne, at around $50 higher per week. Fewer than 1 in 3 local rental properties and less than 2% of houses sold are affordable to those on low income. There's a complete disconnect. The interplay between our municipalities' unique mix of regional and metropolitan areas and the importance of our tourism economy has resulted in a local context of complex housing challenges, placing pressure on the availability of affordable homes and the increasing rate of homelessness. Can I just for a moment just acknowledge the work that our community support centres do in this space? They are doing the heavy lifting. They truly are, alongside Fusion as well. Up until the 1980s, the federal government built public housing. And then our governments made decisions not to do that any longer. And that work went to the private system. So council is sitting in this space where there is a massive gap, and that is council's role to fill gaps. That's what we do, service gaps importantly, but this is a gap where we've got to do something. So I'm going to give you a little snapshot of what council is doing right now. Council has put out 5 properties. They're under 2 not-for-profit groups who are going to build housing on those properties, but those properties are still councils and we're leasing them to the not-for-profits, and they're going to build housing, 1 and 2 bedroom homes, which is what we need the most of on the Mornington Peninsula. We've just put out 3 more properties, so those first 5 properties are in Mornington and Hastings, and the next lot of properties, there are 3 of them, and they're in Rosebud. And they're all going to be working with women and children. Fusion is also doing some of this work as well with young people who have children. And council, I don't know if you know, but the Fusion property is owned by council, and we just extended their lease so that they can do some of that work as well. Because this is a whole of community working together. Council also just put in the budget money for a staff person to make sure the Functional Zero program works. So this is a coordinated approach to homelessness that makes sure that people who are experiencing homelessness are on a list, and so that if they attend Ben's Centre or Jeremy's, we know that they're one person and they haven't attended twice, so they're not double counted. We know who they are. We've been pushing the Airbnb issue. We know that on the peninsula there's close to about 5,500 properties. Only 4,500 of them are registered with the Shire. And we've been pushing. Obviously the state government are hearing, because they're now putting a tax on Airbnbs. But that money won't be returned to the peninsula for housing here. I mean, not far off. The other thing that we've been doing is we've also put out to the state government a contribution levy for developers at 3.3%. Had a lot of backflash about this, a lot of backlash. The planning scheme is owned or is a state government document, and the council administer it. Now, if we see that there's something in that document that needs fixing, we have to do an amendment and put that to the minister. And we have one there at the moment around C219, which was about housing right across the peninsula in general, about whether we're increasing densities or not, or looking after our green wedge. That's still sitting on the minister's desk. The contribution scheme is being rolled out in other parts of the country. Sydney is one, and also here at Fisherman's Bend, where a particular area has been labelled as development, and the developers have had to give a percentage back in money or housing for social housing. And we are trying to bring that here to the peninsula, or get the Victorian government to put it right across the state. We need people to stay in place for social connection, for their health and well-being. Sending people off the peninsula doesn't help. Our children are in schools, their parents are connected here, and we need them to stay here. We need people to live where they work, and those people who are working here need housing. Let me be clear, the end game is to build houses, and we must, as a council and a community, pull every single lever that we can to get that done.
Well, thanks so much, Despi. Somewhere in social media, some person put a comment, what would Despi know about homelessness? And I thought, I hope they come today and they will learn. So that was terrific, and I'm really excited to live in an area where the council is actively involved in this area, because it is really, really important. Okay, I want to acknowledge that we had advertised Gillian West, who's a Bunurong Palawa woman from the islands of Bass Strait. She was going to come and do our Welcome to Country and talk a little bit about Indigenous First Nations resilience. Unfortunately, Gillian's mother is very ill and she is by her side. So, you know, this is a big issue for First Nations people because her mother is not very old. So, all of our thoughts go to Gillian and her family. So, our last speaker, last but not least, a mother of a bunch of kids now, I think 3.
Yep.
3. A tireless campaigner in the area of, climate action. Dr. Kate Lardner is a medical doctor. The reason she's come in late, babysitting issues, so we can probably all relate to that. So she's a medical doctor working for Peninsula Health and currently studying for her specialist exams. Kate co-founded Healthy Futures. That's an organisation empowering healthcare workers to take action on climate change. And she helps facilitate the climate change module for the Monash University medical students annually. Kate lives on the peninsula with her 3 children, husband Harry, and various pets of all shapes and sizes. Kate ran for the Mornington district in the 2022 Victorian state election, and I know there's a lot of faces here that were also involved in that, and we love Kate. So we're really happy to have Kate here today. Remember, any questions, hands up, and Sarah will give you the pen and paper. Welcome, Kate.
Hello, and thank you to all the speakers and Independent for Flinders for making this event happen. You've worked tirelessly and it's fantastic, so thank you. And I want to acknowledge the Bunurong land on which we stand. So my name is Kate and I stood for the 2022 Victorian state election as the independent candidate. And my key policy platforms were climate change, health and integrity. Integrity is a big concept, but I'll touch on it, a few lessons from my campaign at the candidate, party and systems levels. So we had over 100 volunteers and together we knocked on over 2,500 doors, and we had hundreds of conversations in our community about what mattered to us. Our volunteers were asked, what is integrity? Does this matter? What does it really mean? It does matter. It is, in fact, the most key ingredient to what makes a successful leader and a functioning political system that serves everyone. Integrity means doing the right thing, even when it's hard, because it's the right thing to do. It means being honest about what you're going to do, what you're doing, and why. It is key to making the world a better place, and that's whether you're a political incumbent, a political candidate, an advocate, or any other member of society. Let me give some examples from my campaign at the candidate level. We had a rule of always being polite and respectful and positive in our interactions with both the public and our opponents. Our opponents were found to be defacing and graffitiing our signs. We did not stoop to that level. The COVID-19 wave swept through our community, and the early voting sites were high-risk transmission sites because people were lining up in tightly packed queues. Perhaps unsurprisingly, I caught COVID-19, and although there was no legal requirement to test for or isolate at that stage, I felt that putting people's health at risk was not worth the political victory. So I stayed at home and let our campaign team represent us, and thousands of people went through the early voting centres, and the other candidates continued having discussions to win votes, some of which included had viral symptoms themselves. However, if we sacrifice the very principles on which that drive us to create social change, then there is no point in campaigning in the first place. This is the reason we need more independent politicians in our parliaments. Independents by necessity are answerable to their community and only their community. They are there because they've built hundreds of relationships in their community, and their volunteers have had thousands of conversations and reported back on what matters to that community. They're not a mere pawn in a political chess game between faceless political parties and their corporate donors. They're there because they are there to represent your voice. They're not wanting to smooth up the party ladder either, and they're not wanting to retire into a seven-figure consultancy job with a mining company. They are there because they care about doing the right thing, and they believe that people in power should be there doing the right thing. They're there because they have integrity. Let's look at integrity at a party level. Our community in Mornington suffered from party politics, and what I mean by this is the funding went to where it was strategic to get votes rather than from where the community need was. So I had people on the campaign trail coming up to me saying, we're having to turn away sporting teams, we're having to turn away kids for sporting teams because we don't have the facilities. We know the downstream effects if kids can't access sport mentally and physically, that has follow-on effects. We had distressed family members reaching out saying we can't access timely and affordable mental health services and paediatric services. And we had environmental groups, loud and organised, beating the drum about very basic environmental protections, and that was falling on deaf ears. As well as economically being shortchanged in our community, when we were out door knocking, we came across a number of community residents who were very despondent, and their fatalism was palpable, and they said, I've never in my life done a donkey vote, but I am this time, because all the politicians are liars, all the parties are corrupt, and I don't feel that if I vote for someone in a party that they will represent me. They have no faith that the candidates have integrity, and they felt powerless to do anything about it. So looking at integrity at a systems level, if we fast forward almost one full federal election cycle and we see community independence in that mix, we see political representatives that can genuinely be trusted by their community and they're transparent, and we see the huge social and economic benefits that come from that. We also see soaring levels of community and political and social engagement in these communities, and that is active and healthy democracy. That is why we are here today, because we want and we know that we can get independent representation for our community and that we deserve it. So during our election campaign, we built relationships with each other. We reached out to our community on a deep level, and we really listened for the first time to the community. And we had an absolute blast while doing it. It was infectious. People looked at it and they wanted to join. And although Anthony Green overcalled it on the night, I think we were the real winners at the end of the day. And we've really set the bar for what is expected of our political candidates to follow. So thank you to Julia, Despi and Sarah, who ran federal campaigns, and to our state election campaign. We are stronger, more nimble and more empowered than ever before. This is our time for a win, and I believe we can do that. And we will do it while holding our heads up high. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kate. And this is the time for an independent. Kate lost by a hair's breadth. It was so, if you were around, I went to bed laughing, woke up crying. That kind of situation. We are this close and we can do it. Just by looking at the faces in the room, I feel like there's a taste for this, and this is where we go. Okay, so next stage is questions. So Sarah is currently handing out bits of paper. She will take the floor and she will ask, Sarah, there's more. There's more.
More pens.
So remember to ask a polite question, and if you don't get your piece of paper, put your hand up and we'll do our best to get to you. So I'm just waiting for Sarah to finish handing out. So remember, before you leave today, scan the QR code, get involved in Flip for Flinders on Instagram, check out the Facebook page, join the email list just to find out what's going on. Okay, here's Sarah.
Over to Sarah. Well, actually, thought I'd actually start while you all write your questions down by asking the panel, because you're all going to get stiff sitting down, just one question. And I want to know what makes a really good political representative. In fact, let's start with Kate, who's almost been one. What makes a really good one?
Yeah, can I just talk down?
Yeah. Oh, that's your timer.
Karen. Just use that.
Integrity.
What makes
What's a really good political MP?
somebody that's relatable?
Relatable? I was going to say integrity, but I'll say in touch. In touch with the people.
Right? Yeah. I don't think that's working, but just I'll repeat you.
Uncle Lionel told me that we're born with two ears and one mouth.
Oh, yeah.
Which means we should listen more.
Listen more. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say connected.
Connected.
Yeah.
Terrific. Oh, this is a question, I think, for the Independent for Flinders, and that is, will you be involved with Climate 200 and the reason? I'm happy to answer that on behalf of Independent for Flinders. We applied a month or so ago for a accelerator grant from Climate 200, and I appreciate that Climate 200 is divisive. However, we need money to make flyers, to hold a forum like this, to book the room. So we applied and they gave us $22,000. And that money is going to be used to hold events and to make more flyers, more posters, more ads in newspapers, to get the word out that we are looking for an outstanding candidate, community candidate, to represent us. So we need that money, and the decision was made to go with Climate 200. So whether the candidate will be, what did you say, with Climate 200, will be the candidate's decision.
but Independent for Flinders decided we needed resources. Of course, we need you all to donate as well, but this is where we thought rather than put our hand out every time, we would just go for this grant. So we are, yes, with Climate 200 at this stage. Yes, you may, please.
I was just going to add my experience to that, which was I, as a candidate, accepted Climate 200 funding assistance, and that didn't mean funding from Climate 200. It meant that they put the word out to as many people as they could to say who wants to support this. This is what this candidate's doing. So they wouldn't put that out and fundraise on my behalf until they saw that I had a dedicated team. I was already raising my own funds and I was already out campaigning and building community support. So they wouldn't even have a conversation until all of that was there. And then they said it just has to align on climate, integrity and women in politics, and then we can help fundraise. So that just gives a bit of light on how they operate.
While you're there, someone's asked you a question. There you are. How long was your campaign?
Yeah, good question. So I think I got approached to run by a few people in the community at about 120 days out from the election, and I said no, and then it got to 110, it got to 100, it got to 90 days out, and I said yes. So it was about 80 to 90 days.
Well, actually, how did Kate start? Well, there you go. Kate, how did... Oh, okay. Well, actually, this is an interesting question. How do we select a candidate? Whoever asked this question, have you been onto the Independent for Flinders website? Because there's a whole process of how the candidate will be selected. The candidate has not been selected, but there is a process in place, transparent. So please hop onto the website and have a look, and that'll answer your question. Okay. I'm just going to read this one. I haven't vetted it, but I hope it's all right. It seems that greed played a major part in all the issues, something talked about, I guess, today. Greed is promoted. How do we overcome this? Your handwriting are you a doctor, the person who wrote this? So really your question is, how do we overcome greed in politics? It's promoted.
Your success with you are not successful.
Oh, I see. In society it's promoted, okay. I'm going to call on Ben to answer this one. How do we overcome greed?
Come on, Ben, 5 words or less.
If you know me, that's impossible.
You've got 5 minutes.
How do you overcome greed? I would suggest that that's everyone's job, to reset what it means to be an individual in a community, what it means to belong, what it means to be sustained by life. What does it mean to be generous? There's greed attached to generosity. Just ask someone who's got their name on a building. But I think there's many ways in which we can adjust that question. I think one of the things we're grappling with in Western cultures is the disconnection that we're finding as we no longer use communities like religious bodies or faith-based organisations as our source of truth. And so, once upon a time in many of our cultures, that was kind of the place where you went. And greed was a sin or, something that we didn't want to do. And yet today, as we're sort of, moving towards a community which has a majority of people who are not religious, we haven't replaced the moral conversation with anything other than perhaps campaigning or conversations in schools in which there's a whole lot of stuff around that. So I'd suggest that we probably to tackle greed in communities, we need to have conversations together as communities as to what it means to share, what it means to belong, what it means to have enough, and what does that mean about my life and my identity as I do that. So it's very complex, very cultural, interwoven with everything that we have in society. But I would start with having conversations within our communities about what it means to be me, and go from there.
Thank you.
Australian dream of having property, and
Yeah.
I think that's a big part of the dream.
The comment in the front was about the Australian dream, being to own property, as one of the factors that's led to greed. A really good question from someone who I agree with 100%, who's asked Rosie Batty, could you please stand? I know that you would have incredible support. I just whispered in Rosie's ear to ask if I could disclose this to you all, and she's given me her permission. Last May, I went through an awful lot of trouble to find Rosie Batty. I'm a researcher, but I couldn't find her very easily, but luckily, eventually, I was able to contact Rosie to ask that exact question. And I remember the day we met, actually, I had a very bad leg and I was on crutches, and I went over to Hastings, and the first thing I said to Rosie is, if you agree to stand, I think you could win. So you have to really think about whether you want to go to Canberra or not. To Rosie's credit, she did an awful lot of research on what is a community independent. She talked to Mon Ryan, she talked to Simon Holmes a Court from Climate 200, she talked to a lot of people and gave it, I think, and she talked to Kate Lardner, she talked to Despi O'Connor, she talked to me. Am I missing anybody? I think you talked to a lot of people, and I think gave it some serious thought.
I didn't talk to any of the politicians in Canberra.
Yeah. No, but you did go to Canberra, and I remember a photo with you with the teals.
There was speculation.
There was a lot of speculation. In fact, I think somebody naughty actually mentioned at the Sorrento Writers Festival that we had a stellar candidate. And the day after the Sorrento Writers Festival, Rosie rang me and to say, after a lot of thought and consideration, including the fact that she'd have to give up her passport because Section 44 says you can't have two passports, and Rosie has a British passport, she decided that her best work on family violence would be done outside of Parliament. And I have to say I agreed with her, because once you go into Canberra, into Parliament, your own issue, it becomes just one of 100 other issues you have to advocate on. And I think Rosie made the best, not for us the best decision, but the best decision for her, I think, and her work in the space. And that is integrity. And integrity, Kate gave a very lovely definition of integrity, but being true to yourself is a very fundamental thing about integrity. Be true to your values, and Rosie is. And I've known Rosie now only for a year, but would stand by that. And if you see today's age, you'll see just another example of Rosie being brave, and real. I just give her my full admiration, as I'm sure everyone does here too. Okay, now 3 questions for Despi. So Despi, jump up here. Okay, I don't know which one to start with. They're all about housing. The first question actually is it better to fix unused housing than build new housing? I'll ask all 3 together, and then there's one to think about. The second one is, what about giving mums and dads, housing investors, incentives to buy and rent our flats, properties, rather than thinking up more taxes to change for renting our houses? That's a good question. Incentives rather than taxes. And this is a question again for Despi. I have been on public social housing for 19 years, and this person, I don't know if it's a she or a he, at last councillors are addressing this in their platform. So that's a thank you. That's not a question, that's a thank you. So there you go.
Thank you. Thank you. I have been told to stay in my lane, but I'll accept that. I'll start with the better to fix the unused, or the housing that's being locked up. We are doing a big piece of work at the moment with Harriet Shing, thanks to SWAN, the Southern Women's Action Network, there's quite a few of them in the audience today, who have been helping council advocate from the side, which has been so good because it strengthens council's stand. We've got somebody else standing beside us to do this work. We do need to fix those properties. That's a no-brainer. But here's how it works. There's a contract that the Victorian government have where a contractor does that work. They decide where they're going to work, what homes they're going to fix, how many they're going to fix. That's all part of the contract. And so lots of the homes down here, because we're not an issue, are we? I mean, even the minister had said, "Oh, I didn't think there was an issue down here." To us, the Swan women didn't like that, which was great. And she very quickly learnt that actually there's a massive issue down here. Council are talking to the minister about how can we get involved? How can council get involved in looking after a tender just for our area? How can we be, put to work to actually see that work get done? Because if we could do that, not sure how many houses because they won't tell us, but let's just say there might be over 500 properties. How's that number?
428.
There you go, 428. That'd be a great start, wouldn't it? To actually helping house people. So something that we are looking at. And yes, I agree. Let's fix what we've got and then build some more. Giving mum and dads housing who are trying to buy into invest. It's such a tricky one. Firstly, there's already a few things that you get out of it. A, you've got a property, and B, you're getting tax incentives. So you get tax incentives, the first lot being negative gearing. You can actually wipe off all your costs, including your interest, through the tax department for that property. Also, when you go to sell it, you won't have to pay 50% of your capital gain tax. That's a big incentive. And actually, when that legislation was brought in, that's when we saw speculation in the market, in the housing market, absolutely destroy housing in this country. Absolutely destroy it. And we talked about greed before, and I was sitting there thinking, this is one of those moments where we have to say, why are we allowing housing to be a speculative market when we actually just need to put people in homes? And if we can put people in homes, we look after mental health, we look after other risk factors that will just ruin people. So we need to do some of that work. I think, there's been, land tax has come into the equation recently. I don't know if I really want to comment on land tax other than to say, maybe I won't comment. But perhaps it's just, it comes back to greed again. If you've got a lot of, I had someone say to me, I've got so many properties and my land tax bill is out the window. So I said, maybe you could sell one. And perhaps that's the issue. But the contribution tax idea as well actually gives us a way that we can pay for housing. So it's something, I guess, and when I was listening to the greed question, I thought, when we all go to vote, when we all go and stand at the polling booths at the next federal and state election, we need to think about people in our community who are more vulnerable than us. And that's where we put our vote.
Yeah, good point. Thank you, Despi. Also worth remembering Bill Shorten at this moment, perhaps, because he introduced or tried to introduce some of the policies that may have made life better for this, negative gearing, capital gains. And just think, if he'd come in 2019, I'm not sure if we'd have this strong independent movement without that, because a lot of us were so appalled at the most recent Morrison government. Anyway, I'm just speaking out of turn because it's not... I've got 3 questions for the independent movement, so I'll answer those at the end. But we have a question here for Sue. Okay, there's 2 questions. What is the sustainable population of the world and Australia? Just pull that number out of your head if you could. And economists always look for growth. This is obviously unsustainable. how else do we measure sustainable success? That's a great question. Thank you, whoever asked that one. They're hard. Now you've got to, oh, that's it.
I'm not sure I can answer either of those. I'm a scientist, not an economist. What is the sustainable population of the world or Australia? Actually, I think it's whatever it needs to be. The point is we have so many solutions for energy, for actually creating the environment we need to create. If only we would actually back them and implement them. You know, a lot of the issues to do. You know, I'm also one of my gigs is as part of the Academy of Technology and Engineering, and we're looking at things like the range of technical solutions that are available now to actually address our getting rid of fossil fuels, for having renewable energy as a sustainable solution to serve Australia. And I think the same things are clearly available to the rest of the world as well. So I think a lot of the solutions that we need exist or are very close to existing. But there are two key factors in actually implementing them. One is regulation and the way government works with industry to actually facilitate it, and also to break that sort of connection to the greed cycle in terms of industries who want to just keep making money. So there's the regulation side and regulation and policy side of it. The other critical part is social license, because a lot of the solutions that we need to implement are going to impact people. You know, we do need to move power around. We do need to build batteries. We do need to think about offshore wind. You know, but these all have their own challenges, but none of them are insurmountable. So I think a lot of the issues to do with creating a sustainable world are really around taking the solutions that we have, maybe looking a bit harder at some of the solutions we still need to implement, but making sure that we connect across society, that we have the regulations in place, we have the policies, we have industry working actively with government to make sure that can happen, but also that you have the social licence. You've got to tell the stories. People have to understand, why is this important to me? And I think a lot of people at the moment, there are still a lot of deniers around climate change, but a lot of that is because it's comfortable just to think that way, because change is hard. To actually change your practices, to change what you do, is hard. And I think telling stories and making sure that we bring everyone along really means that, I think whatever population we get to, we can sustain, but we've just got to work hard to do it. So, sorry I don't have a number, but I think it's achievable wherever we set it. Now, economists always look for growth, which is obviously unsustainable. How else do we measure sustainable success? Well, I think probably I'll circle back to my answer to the first question. I think we measure sustainable success by actually being sustainable and creating that sort of equality across society, so that we don't have the haves and the have-nots, that we do have houses, that we do have homes to go to, we have jobs, we can feed our children, and we have that access right across the whole society. I mean, that sounds horribly egalitarian, but I think that really, in the end, is how we measure sustainability and success. Because it's not, I think the economists come into it really in terms of getting that balance right, to make sure that we actually have the income, we have the taxes, we have the governance and the government situations that we need to meet our societal needs. So I'm not sure if I've answered that question, but I think it goes around in circles.
Thank you. Thank you.
The answer is you don't. So we don't get involved in the bad. We let someone else do that. We stay fighting the good fight, because there is so much good that needs to be done, and there's so much bad that's happening. We don't get dragged into that at all. And it doesn't feel good to be dragged into that. And it's very tempting at times to think, I want to point that out because that's really unfair what happened there. But we don't do that. So we just focus on what's the work that needs to be done, what's the good that needs to be done, and do that. Just like climate deniers, I personally don't think there's much point engaging in those conversations because there's so much that actually needs to be done. If you're being dragged into that, it just takes you away from the main purpose. So I think being positive is so important, but it feels good and it's fun, and it grows a movement because people want to be involved in that.
That was a great answer. It's also worth noting that when Zali Steggall was elected, before really the Teal movement, they actually had two working together groups. They had Vote Tony Out for Vote Tony Abbott Out, but they were doing the negative, and then they had the independents speaking only positively. And in that case, it worked well, but most of the voices groups are all exactly what Kate has said, and that is focus on the positives. When they go low, you go high. That's generally if you read Cathy McGowan's book, she points that out quite strongly. Gentleman who just gave me the question, I can't read your writing. Could you come up and read it yourself? Oh, there's a few words. You can call out the word I can't read. I think growth, this is basically a response to Sue's answer. I think growth can be looked at differently to how we look at... Economically. Is that saying the financial growth? Oh gosh, your F is a funny F. Okay. Growth comes from innovation, creativity, etc., etc. That's, as a Tony Jones would say, I'll take that as a comment, I think. But it's a good comment.
But it's something I think should be thrown into the conversation.
Yes.
Rather than this closed mind sort of look at it, growth as being something negative all the time. There is growth happening in economies, but it's happening through our creativity and all those.
Yeah, no, Sue would like to respond. That's a very good, thank you. Yeah. And work on your handwriting a bit too.
I think she could turn that around and make it a positive comment.
Oh, sorry.
I totally agree with you, and I think that's partly why I spoke particularly around the ocean, because I think a lot of innovation is happening in terms of how do we actually encourage businesses and economic growth, while at the same time ensuring that we have a healthy ocean. I use an example of an organisation called the Ocean Impact Organisation, who actually provide startups. They encourage startups and small businesses that are looking at how to do things like to reuse waste, to look at solutions that to avoid damage to the ocean while at the same time actually generating growth and income on land, looking at new forms of replacements for plastics and things like that. And I think that has been done very much stimulated by the startup side of things, which I think is where a lot of that innovation comes from. We could use a lot more innovation at big business level as well, but I think the startups are certainly doing a lot on that side.
Yeah, and
thanks.
That you just expressed, it really is underpinning what growth is and where our financials get its from.
That's right.
Our continued innovation to improve everything about how we do things.
Totally, and bringing young people into that through. I do a lot of work with one of the smaller Sydney universities, which has a lot of a big startup side of things, and they are generating huge amounts of jobs and ideas through the startup space. And these are young people that are going out, starting up new businesses, and really starting that cycle, from the grassroots up.
Thank you, Sue. This is more of a comment related to me mentioning that Rosie has 2 passports. And this gentleman has said, we are a multicultural society. Surely our parliament would be better if we had dual passport holders included as members. Could not agree with you more. However, it's in the Constitution, so it's going to require another referendum. And we're all very damaged by... Yeah, and we're all very, very damaged by the last referendum, or many of us here, I'm sure, also have been. But I think the independents should, in my view, I'm not going to be the candidate, obviously, but I think independents should include dual nationals as a policy issue, because when I last looked, I think we had 49% of Australians had parents born in another country. So they all have I think Despi had 2 passports before. No, he didn't. Okay. But I still think we need to sort of think about this as a really pressing issue. If we want our parliament to reflect the population, which we do, I think it's a really important issue. But I hope it's in Rosie's lifetime, because that means it'll be in my lifetime too. So I hope so. This is a very, very good question, and I think I can answer it, but I'm going to actually throw it over to one of the panel to try to answer. Given the community is divided on a number of issues, the voice referendum, climate change, taxation and services that support the community, how does an independent represent the diversity in the community? I could answer that, but I would rather... Kate, have a go at that one.
Wave the magic wand. I felt this during my... Thank you. During the state election campaign, we had an issue around the train line in Mornington, and the group of volunteers that ran the train line felt that that was a very big part of it, almost a men's shed, but also a tourist facility, and they were very proud of that. The local environmental group said, there's a chocolate lily there that doesn't grow anywhere else in Australia, and so we need to protect this exact strip where the train is. And the bike path group, who was very vocal, said this is exactly where the bike path needs to go. So the train would have to stop and the chocolate lilies would have to go. So that was really hard, because everyone had their, they were so passionate and had their reasons for wanting that. And I realised that I can't take a side here, because it all makes sense. And if I was to govern, I would bring them into a room together, and it would have to be probably a series of building relationships, understanding each other's point of view, and developing empathy for that, and figuring out how can we come up with something together as a group. What information do we not have? What do we not know, and get that information, and how can we come to this together on kind of civil grounds? And I think that's how independents govern, is that they know their communities so well, they deeply know those issues, and they've got relationships with all the different groups, and so they can facilitate that kind of discussion. But I'll throw to someone else.
What a shame Kate didn't get those last 500 votes, hey? Because we need someone like that in Parliament. So just bringing people together with different views into a room with empathy. Hey, that sounds like a great idea, doesn't it? So I, for one, am regretful that you didn't get over the line. So, yeah. The last 3 questions I have in my hand are really about the independents, but this is more of a comment, but I certainly agree with it as well. Here he goes, from Damien. The crises discussed today arise from a growing imbalance of power between men and women, labour and capital, colonised and coloniser, and between the young and the old. Redressing these imbalances requires a stronger movement for justice, largely from our parliaments. I'm not quite sure why you've said why, but I mean, why has this happened? I mean, that's a huge question, but...
largely absent.
Oh, beg your pardon, largely absent from our parliaments. I think that's why we need an independent up there, because this is the crux of our fragile democracy at the moment. We are so divided, and the growing imbalance of power between the groups that you've mentioned. I think we need an independent who represents our community and can advocate on that. Do you want to come up here and have a chat about that? Because I think that's a really good question. Come and have a quick chat. We've got time because we missed out one speaker, so we have 10 minutes. I'm a very strict timekeeper, so we're finishing at 3 o'clock. So come and have a quick chat about that, because I think it's a great question.
Thank you. Hello to everybody. I think the question arose from some of my discussions with Bronwyn Curry, who I'm here with today, and also just from my experience of being involved loosely with the Voices for Goldstein campaign. I recognise a couple of people from that movement a couple of years ago. And it was really thinking about, I guess, the paradox that the community independents represent at the moment, which was where you could see them positioning themselves politically between this idea of a kind of, rapidly diverging ideology within our political system. But in parliaments, we see it converging. So if you think about the issues of the past few months in Australia, we see this rapid convergence between Labor and Liberal parties over issues like religious discrimination, over issues like the EPA, over matters to do with even questions on the census. There's this desire for both sides to, work more closely and closely together. So I think the paradox was, what would a community independent represent if they were seeking to position themselves between the two, when in fact it was the convergence of those political parties and their movement largely towards the right that was the origin of that imbalance of power which I was describing. So that was where I wondered how people here perhaps thought about that and how they would see a solution arising.
I'm going to throw that answer over to Ben.
I think it's a really great observation that our communities largely are disconnected from conversation together. And I think mostly when we have an understanding of what our neighbour is experiencing, whoever that neighbour is, whether it be a physical next door neighbour or whether it be the person across the street or perhaps just somebody that's not like us, I think we bridge the gap between how we feel about those people. In my experience in a faith-based movement some years ago, when the plebiscite took place and same-sex marriage was given approval under law, we went through a long conversation in our movement about what to do about that, because we could authorise marriages, but there was this sort of discontent among the people, and we didn't want to split the movement in half, as had been done in many different conversations. And I know that I'm sort of paralleling here, but for me, what was so successful at that point in time in our sort of environment, but I think is equally as demonstrated in other movements, is when you have adequate leadership in place that's prepared to lead conversation and be prepared to foster a sense of consensus building, not of majority building, but consensus building. Help, and Kate explained that really, really well. Bringing people together. What don't we have in the room? Whose voice, whose experience, whose lived life don't we have in this room? Because when we understand those people and actually are familiar with them and actually maybe even become friends with them, all of a sudden our community grows wider and we can actually move and change direction actually really efficiently and effectively on massive issues that are in place right now, such as inequality. I think when it comes to big issues like that, often we try to go for the polar ends and then convince the other side that our side's better. But that's been proven for generations as a really bad way to do things. In business, we once upon a time used things like SWOT analyses. That's PTSD for me. Like going strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, analysing situations. I don't know if anybody has come across things like asset-based planning or asset mapping, where we look at strengths and we move towards the strengths of the people that are in the room. And then if we find that maybe we're lacking in a bit of strength somewhere, we pull someone else into the room. And we're doing it in schools, we're doing it in community organisations, and that's how you build consensus. You don't work on your deficiency necessarily, you bring strengths to the play. So I think whether it be campaigning or whether it be setting policy, when we can do that more effectively by having conversations, bringing more people into the room together, that's where we can be really effective at changing people's outcomes, particularly those who are vulnerable or oppressed. I don't know whether that answered any questions. But
maybe you both need to go into therapy for SWOT analysis. I've done a lot of those in my time. I think this is a little time for me to give a little bit of a plug to the Independent for Flinders, because we are taking a strength-based approach to building our movement. So if you've got skills and expertise in certain areas, please sign up on our website and offer your skills. Do what you're best at. I think that's what we all need to do sometimes in growing a movement like this, is do what you're best at, what you love doing, what you want to do. Don't just get allocated a task that you might not be very good at. Look, I had a question for Rosie. I'm sorry, I've got some other questions which I've got time for, but I just want to quickly ask Rosie this question, because in the news on Friday we heard about the $4.7 billion that's been allocated to, it was announced on Friday, I think, for family violence. And I really want to know if Rosie was the person to allocate that money, apart from giving it to herself, how would she spend it?
So all my credibility is going to go out the window because I said I'd have a really good holiday.
Yes.
All jokes aside, the feds are very good at making a lot of money sound an awful lot. And they're very good at robbing bits from what they've already committed to repackage it. So you've got to be really cynical and look through that. All sides of politics do this. I've learnt myself to understand. So yeah, it sounds like a really lot of money. There are many places that need it, and I know currently the frontline services are absolutely not being able to meet demand. So clearly there has to be some prioritisation of putting money where it's needed. I also know that the community legal centres have been absolutely not knowing how they're going to keep their doors open. Access to justice for anyone who is compromised financially, and I've been in that situation myself, absolutely have nowhere to go other than community legal centres. They do an amazing job, not just for victims of family violence, but across the spectrum of community, including elderly people too. So I'm really encouraged to see that finally they're recognising the variety of work that community legal centres do in many of the contexts that we've been talking about here with consumer rights and everything. But prevention is also an incredibly important investment as well. There are solutions to this problem, but they are complex. And to have success does mean that we need to resolve a lot of these societal issues that we also that drive and exacerbate violence. So how I would spend it is by, again, as we've talked about, deeply listening to what communities are saying that they need, and the organisations doing their utmost to support community in that. And those in Canberra aren't all that great at listening to exactly what's happening in community, and we have and Aboriginal people can speak to that clearly. So I welcome the announcement. I think it's on face value, it looks great. It will be scrutinised heavily, and there'll be a lot of people I know looking very carefully through that. It will never be enough. It will never be enough. The work that we have ahead of us that requires every single one of us, but we do need government to support the organisations working on that front line. I have quoted, it's quite confrontational, but I do say quite often the investment we make in submarines and threat of terrorism from overseas, we find the money. We find the money to put it where we need in that regard, but we struggle to fight and counteract the terrorism that many people are experiencing in their own home. That's where we also need to be able to put it. Thanks.
Maybe the AUKUS money could go into preventative strategies, $380 billion, yeah. This is a question that Despi has agreed to answer. Why not join with the Greens, the party which is standing strong on climate, environment and human rights, including domestic violence and Palestine? Despi.
It's a great question. I've never been a member of a political party, ever, my entire life. my dad voted Liberal at some stage. Somehow I got him to turn that around at some point in my early 20s because I didn't feel like I was being represented. But it's a difficult space. Ben talked before about consensus, and that only comes through deliberative democracy, where you actually bring people together and have conversations. And I think for a lot of us in the room, and I know there are people who are involved in parties in the room, but I think there are lots of us in the room who don't feel like the party system is working, as Damien was saying before. And I think for those of us who want to see change, seeing independence in Canberra creates that change, because you have politicians who aren't representing a party, they're standing representing their community. Just their community, and that's it. And I know we're diverse, aren't we? You know, the Mornington Peninsula is incredibly diverse, but until you get everybody in the room together, and you have to do that, it's going to take a lot of work. Council is doing some of that at the moment. We're legislated to do that. We have to do deliberative democracy to write our council plan. And Mornington Peninsula Shire are the only council in Victoria who have continued the citizen panel through 4 years. 4 years. Most councils gave it up after one. They did their deliberative democracy and they stopped. But we've continued that. We've continued those discussions. I think the other thing is to find a space where everybody can have those conversations means we need to be in the centre. So it can't be to the right, it can't be to the left, it has to be somewhere back at the centre. And, you know, I've learnt over the last 4 years how centre I am when I compare myself to other people in my space, in the councillor space. I'm learning I'm more centre than I thought I was. Lots of people call me left. I don't think I'm as left as what they think I am. But I think if we can bring it back to community, and our independent represents us as a community, I think there's power in that, because there's power in community and we need to lift that.
That was a great answer, Despi. Thank you. Maureen has asked an important question, or a comment really, about the independent supporting truth-telling and treaty and the other pillars of the Uluru Statement of the Heart. I think many people in this room were devastated by not just the outcome of the referendum, but the process where, well, we don't need to go over it now. I certainly know that these truth-telling and treaty are incredibly important for our future, both white and non-white. I think we need to accept that we're all in this together. And if Gillian had been here today, I was going to ask her, because this is mostly a non-Indigenous audience, I wanted to ask her what advice she could give us about how to be the best allies we could be. You know, what do we need to do to be the best allies? And I think standing strong on the Uluru Statement of the Heart is incredibly important. Are there any more questions? I think there is another. Did I not read your question?
You did, but the comment was just quickly read, I believe. My comment about the public housing wasn't that I was on...
Do you want to come back up here and have... oh, no.
Wasn't that I was on public housing for 19 years, but there are people that have been on the public waiting list for over 19 years.
Sorry.
And sadly, it wasn't that long ago before COVID-19 that none of the councillors even mentioned those running for the elections even mentioned homelessness. And I think it's important that we all, and I think we will now, at least see it as an issue, local as well, as state and federal.
Yeah, I think so. I think for the work of people like Ben and Despi doing this work, it's raising the issue more into the public profile, particularly.
And there's a role for local council to do that.
Absolutely.
It's fantastic that's starting to.
And there's council elections coming up, so, you know, we need people on there who are good advocates, Rob, I'm actually not going to... sorry, you didn't write your question down. Did you give it to me? Oh. I'm going to actually stop you because, as I said, I'm a keen timekeeper and it's 5 to 3, so I think it's time to wrap this up. I'd like to extend my thanks to Robin for emceeing it with such aplomb. And I'd particularly like to thank the speakers for just making this such a success. I mean, filling the room. So thank you to the speakers. There's a few thank yous. Stefan, you might have noticed in the corner, he's actually filmed the entire forum, the speakers and the questions. So if your friends would like to tune in, I'll get it as a YouTube video online quite soon, and your friends can have a cup of tea and sit down for 2 hours and have a listen and a watch. So I'd also like to thank the Mornington Neighbourhood Huddle. I don't know if you're all aware, but with the independent... I'm going to do this thing, hang on. Is that right? Yeah. No. Just pull. Okay. So Flinders is a huge electorate. So we have decided to break ourselves up into huddles, we're calling them. So the Mornington Mount Martha Mount Eliza huddle, or actually Robin, we went out for lunch and we decided to have this forum. So many of the members here today have really made this happen. So thank you. One of the people who's not here today, Marie Bakash, made this announcement at one of our coffee groups that she could get donations from Dan Murphy's for wine for all the speakers. And we thought, oh yeah, sure. She arrived at my house a few hours later with 6 bottles of wine. Now, I can't guarantee the quality. I don't know anything to drink, but you've got cook with it. And now imagine a big corporation giving us free wine. I thought we might have another forum next week and get another 6 bottles. Thank you. So each time we bring people together, whether it be the progressives of the peninsula, I have to say, Despi, I am left, so that's why. But I started a group last year, the progressives of the peninsula, because I felt Labor, Greens, Animal Justice Party and those who support an independent are basically quite united on issues of social justice and kindness and climate action. So we've got a group. And we had a forum last year where we brought the community together. And at that community, I talked about democracy. I mean, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires people getting involved. And I'm really thanking you all, as in the audience today, for sort of showing up on a Sunday afternoon at what I think is a pivotal moment in our history. We're facing an existential climate crisis, but we're also facing an increasingly fragile democracy. So I'm sure, I know some of my Labor friends are here today, and I'm really glad that you turned up, so thank you to Marg and Kath, I know they're here, so thank you. But I'm really concerned that both major parties, both Labor and Liberal, remain committed to fossil fuels. And we know they're destroying our planet. And I think Dutton's latest nuclear thought bubble is really rallying people to our cause, because we need to find this outstanding community independent candidate who's going to stand against Zoe Mackenzie. We need this stellar candidate. We didn't get Rosie, we tried, but we're looking, so if you know anyone who you think would love to or could be or want to be the candidate, please ask them to get in touch. But in addition to finding that stellar candidate, what we also need to do is to form this group that's going to support that candidate. The candidate's going to put up their hand and say, hey, there's 300 people who already are involved in the Independent for Flinders. That's a great base. So part of that is building relationships. Not necessarily best friends, but certainly relationships. So the Mount Martha Huddle is having a pub night on the 3rd of October. You don't have to live in Mount Martha. If you want to come along to the Dava on the 3rd of October, we're doing that. And we're also, if you look at this room today, you'll see we're appealing to a certain demographic. We're going to have to get young people involved. And I know social media, I know TikTok and all this, but I still think getting people together to build those relationships. So we're going to have we're talking about a music event in November when the weather's better, an outside music event. Hopefully getting some young people to come along to perform, and hopefully that will bring some young people in. But I'm just going to finish at 2 minutes to 3 by quoting Zoe Daniels, who's it's already been mentioned today, the independent for Goldstone, who is going to win. Despite what people are saying on Insiders this morning, Zoe is going to hold that seat. But she gave some really good advice, I think. And she said if each person, well, she didn't say it about this room, but I'm going to translate it to this room. If each of us here today could talk to 10 people about the Independent for Flinders, and then ask them to talk to 10 people, and each of them talk to 10 people, that's how we're going to grow. By having these conversations, by spreading the word, that's how we're going to find this outstanding candidate who might not have even heard of us yet. So we need to keep the conversations going. So with that in mind, before you leave today, there's a QR code on the back table and the front table where you can get to our website, sign up, get involved, because we really do need all hands on deck. Thank you.